I'm sitting in the waiting room outside the courthouse. Fluorescent lights, cold linoleum. My hands are folded in my lap, perfectly still. My lawyer is somewhere down the hall making a phone call. I can hear him through the door. His voice is confident, measured. He doesn't know yet that everything he's about to argue has already been won. Not by him, by me. The bailiff walks past. He glances at me. I don't look away. I don't look afraid. I look like someone who knows something he doesn't. 6 months ago, I didn't know what was happening in my own house. I didn't know that the person I trusted most had been stealing my identity. I didn't know that my mother, my own mother, had helped him do it. I didn't know that my sister was recording our conversations and sending them to my husband's lawyer. I didn't know that the bank account I opened when I was 23, the one with $47,000 in it, was being drained systematically, $10,000 at a time, and that no one was going to tell me about it. I found out everything at once, like walking into a room and suddenly the lights go out and you're hitting walls you couldn't see coming. But that's not where the story starts. It starts earlier. It starts in the place where I should have been the safest. My name is Elizabeth Chen. Everyone calls me Liz. I'm 32 years old. I work in marketing for a pharmaceutical company and I'm very good at what I do. I'm the kind of person who reads contracts carefully. I remember faces. I notice when things don't add up. I'm observant, logical, the type of woman who plans ahead. I should have seen it coming. But I was busy, I was happy, I was stupid. I bought the house 5 years ago. It's in Portland, Oregon, a 1970s craftsman with original hardwood floors and a kitchen I renovated myself. I did most of the work myself because I wanted it done right. I have a good eye for detail. I'm patient with projects. The house is pale blue with dark gray shutters, and there's a garden out back where I grow tomatoes and basil in the summer. I never thought it would become a war zone. My husband, David, moved in with me 2 years into the relationship. He was a real estate appraiser, or at least he told me he was. I learned later that his license had been revoked 8 years earlier. I learned a lot of things later. David was charming. The kind of charming that makes you ignore the small things, like how he never remembered to pay bills, like how he borrowed money from my mother when he thought I wasn't listening, like how he had 3 different phones, which he explained was for work, until I realized one of them was just his second life with someone else. But in the beginning, he was the kind of man who brought me coffee in the morning. He'd remember how I liked it. 1 cream, no sugar. He'd leave little notes on the bathroom mirror. Things like, "You're brilliant," or "Can't wait to see you tonight." He'd touch my back when we walked through the door together, like he needed to keep me close. My mother loved him. She said he was kind. She said he made me laugh. She said he was the kind of man who would take care of me. My sister, Rebecca, was more careful. She'd known David's sister from high school, and apparently there were rumors about him. Things like unpaid debts, a girlfriend in Seattle, a landlord in Vancouver who was suing him. But Rebecca never said anything directly. She just got quiet when David was around. I should have asked her more questions. Instead, I married him. We did it quietly at the courthouse on a Friday afternoon, just my mother, my sister, and my father. It felt intimate, special. David promised it was just the beginning, we'd have a big party later. We never did. Everything changed, exactly 7 months and 13 days into the marriage. I was at work, sitting at my desk on the 3rd floor of the Meridian building downtown. I was reviewing a presentation for a new campaign when my mother called. She does this sometimes, calls me at odd hours with small things. Today it was to ask if I'd gotten my dry cleaning picked up. We had a lunch date that Friday. Except I could hear it in her voice, the way she was breathing, the way she was being too casual about the dry cleaning, which she'd never cared about before. "Mom," I said, "what's wrong?" There was a pause, a long one. In that pause, my life rearranged itself without my permission. "David came by today," she said. "He asked to borrow $5,000. I set down my pen very carefully. I was still holding it when she told me the rest. He'd said it was for a business opportunity. He said he needed it within 3 days. He said he'd pay her back with interest. He said he didn't want to ask you, Liz, because he knew you'd worry. Those are the exact words he used, according to my mother. I didn't want to ask you, Liz, because you'd worry. Which meant he knew I would say no. Which meant he'd been planning to hide it. I went home early that day. I didn't call David to warn him. I just left the office, got in my car, and drove back to the pale blue house with the dark gray shutters. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from something else, something like clarity. David's car was in the driveway. He was home. I could see him through the kitchen window, standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone. He was wearing the blue sweater I'd given him for his birthday. He looked peaceful, innocent. I stood outside for 3 minutes before I went in. He looked up when I came through the door. His expression shifted from peaceful to something I'd never seen before, something caught, like an animal in headlights. "Hey," he said, "you're early." "My mother called," I said. I set my keys on the table very slowly. "She said you asked her for $5,000. His face moved through several expressions very quickly. Shock, denial, then something else, manipulation. "She called you," he said. "That's not what I was going to tell you. I needed to figure some things out first." "Figure what things out?" I was standing in my kitchen in my house that I paid for, and this man I'd married was lying to me while wearing the sweater I'd bought him. "A business thing," he said. "It's not a big deal. Your mom is overreacting." I've learned a lot since then about how liars work. They bank on the fact that you want to believe them. They give you small truths wrapped around big lies. They make you question your own judgment. But in that moment, I was still naive enough to feel doubt. "Why didn't you ask me?" I said. "Because you would have said no," he said. And he said it so simply, so matter of fact, like it wasn't a violation, like it wasn't the first domino falling. I asked him to sit down. We sat at the kitchen table, the one I'd refinished myself, sanding it down and staining it a dark walnut color. He wouldn't look at me. "I need to know everything," I said. "Starting from the beginning, and I need the truth." He told me a version of the truth, not the whole thing. I know that now, but enough that I thought I understood the problem. He said he'd made some bad decisions before we met. He said there were debts from his old business. He said he needed money to settle something, and he didn't know how to tell me. "How much?" I asked. 15,000, he said quietly. "Maybe more." I felt something cold move through my chest. "Maybe more? David, how is it maybe more? Either you know how much you owe or you don't." "I don't," he said, and for the first time he looked at me. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to involve you in this. I thought I could handle it on my own." I believed him because I wanted to believe him. I believed him because he was crying a little bit, and because he said my name the way he used to when we first met, like I was the only real thing in his world. I told him I'd loan him the money, not my mother, me, and he'd have to pay me back with a contract with terms with dates. He agreed. He apologized. He said it wouldn't happen again. It happened again, but worse, and in ways I didn't understand until much later. The next 2 months were strange, not bad, just strange. David got quieter. He spent more time on his phone. He'd leave the room when I came in. He stopped leaving notes on the bathroom mirror. He stopped remembering how I liked my coffee. I asked Rebecca about it once. We were getting coffee ourselves, just the two of us, at a place near her apartment in southeast Portland. "Does David seem different to you?" I asked. Rebecca took a long time to answer. She was stirring her latte, not looking at me. "Different how?" she said finally. "I don't know, distant, like he's thinking about something else all the time." Rebecca set down her spoon. "Liz, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really listen to me." Those words, I should have paid more attention to those words, but I was defensive already, anticipating judgment. "What?" I said. "When David's sister came to town last month, she told me." "Rebecca, I don't want to hear gossip about David's family." "It's not gossip," she said quietly. "It's a pattern. She said that David borrowed money from his last girlfriend, a lot of money, and he never paid her back. She said he had a whole second relationship happening at the same time. She said, "Stop," I said. "I don't want to hear this." I left. I actually left in the middle of her sentence and drove back to my house, angry at my sister for trying to poison me against my husband, angry at myself for listening, angry at something I couldn't quite name. Rebecca called me 3 times that evening. I didn't answer. David asked me why I seemed upset when I got home. I told him nothing was wrong. We didn't have sex that night. We didn't really talk. We just went to bed, and I lay awake wondering if my sister was right and hating myself for the fact that I was wondering. The next morning, I checked my bank accounts. This was a mistake, not checking them sooner. My checking account was fine. My savings account was fine. But the money market account, the one I'd opened years ago and hadn't touched in so long that I'd almost forgotten about it, had been accessed. $8,000 was missing. I called the bank immediately. My voice didn't shake. I was very efficient. I explained the situation. I asked them to tell me when the transaction occurred. They told me it was a wire transfer, made online, exactly 19 days earlier. Exactly 19 days after my mother called me about the loan. I asked them if there was a way to see the authorization details. They said the IP address that logged into the account came from an address in Portland. They gave me the address. It was my own address, my own house. I sat at my desk for a long time with that information. My hands were folded in my lap again, very still, like they were separate from the rest of me. David was at work, supposedly. I hadn't checked. I should have been checking a lot of things by then, but I was still in the part of my life where I believed what people told me. I called my mother. "Did David mention anything about a wire transfer?" I asked. "Did he ask you for access to anything? Passwords? Bank information?" "No," she said, but she said it too quickly. "Why? What's wrong?" "Someone transferred $8,000 out of my money market account," I said. "Someone who was in my house when it happened." The silence on the other end was very loud. "Mom, I think you should talk to David about this," she said. "I'm asking you, did he ask you for access to my accounts?" "No," she said again, and then, "But he did ask me your security questions." My stomach moved. I could actually feel it. The physical sensation of my body understanding something my mind wasn't ready to accept. "What do you mean, he asked you my security questions?" "He said he was trying to surprise you with something. He said he wanted to access some accounts, but couldn't remember the answers to your questions. He said it would be faster to ask me than to ask you and ruin the surprise." "What did you tell him?" "I gave him the answers," she said. "But Liz, I didn't know. I thought it was okay. I thought he was your husband, I thought." I hung up. I didn't mean to be rude. I just couldn't listen to her explain how she'd given my husband the keys to my financial life. I called the bank back and froze the account. I changed all my passwords from my work computer. I didn't want to use my home computer, just in case, just in case, just in case. I called my credit card companies and told them what had happened. I checked my credit report and found 3 new accounts opened in my name in the last month and a half. 3. I sat at my desk and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter, something that felt like ice forming on the surface of a lake. I went home at 5 p.m. I made dinner. I made pasta, David's favorite, the kind with the cream sauce and the mushrooms that I grew myself. I set the table nicely. I poured wine. And when he came home, I was already sitting there waiting for him. He came in like usual, kissed the top of my head, asked about my day. I told him it was fine. I asked him about his. He said it was boring, lots of paperwork. We ate dinner together. He told me about a house he'd appraised on the east side. He was talking, and I was listening, and he didn't know that everything had changed, that I had changed. After dinner, I cleaned up. He went to watch TV. I came back to the living room with the phone in my hand. "We need to talk," I said. He looked at me. Some flicker of awareness crossed his face. He knew. or at least some part of him knew. About what? He said. About the money that's missing from my account, I said. About the accounts opened in my name. About the security questions you got from my mother. The air in the room changed. It actually became heavier, like all the oxygen left at once. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. David. I'm serious. I have no idea. I called the bank. I have the IP address. I have the timestamp. I know what happened. He stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. For a long time, he didn't say anything. I needed money, he said finally. I was in a lot of trouble and I needed money fast. So you stole it from me. I didn't steal it. I was going to pay it back. With what? I said. With what money, David? You don't have a job that makes enough. You lied about your business. You lied about your credentials. You borrowed from my mother and you didn't pay her back. How were you planning to pay me back? He turned to look at me then. His face was different, harder, like a mask had slipped. We're married, he said. What's yours is mine. That's how marriage works. I felt something in my chest crack open. No, I said. No, that's not how it works. Not like this. Not when you're lying, not when you're stealing. I wasn't stealing from you. I was borrowing from us. Stop, I said. I held up my hand. Just stop. I need you to pack a bag and go stay somewhere else for a while. I can't. I can't be around you right now. He looked like I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue. He went upstairs and packed a duffel bag and left. He drove to a hotel somewhere. I didn't ask which one. I didn't want to know. I didn't want to know anything about where he was or what he was doing. I sat in my living room, in the house I'd paid for, in the marriage I'd believed in, and I cried for the first time. But it wouldn't be the last time I cried, not by a long way. The next week was a blur of phone calls and meetings. I hired a lawyer named Susan Accusations, who came recommended by a friend at work. She was direct and efficient, which I appreciated. She listened to my story without judgment. She took notes. I need to ask you some difficult questions, she said. We were sitting in her office in a downtown building with tall windows. Portland was gray and rainy outside. Okay, I said. Have you filed your taxes jointly? Yes, last year. Does he have access to any of your other accounts? Credit cards? Investment accounts? I don't think so, not that I know of. You need to check, today, and once you do, you need to freeze everything. Everything, Elizabeth. Credit cards, investment accounts, property records, everything. Because what he's done is not going to be limited to your money market account. That's never how this works. She was right. I went home and spent 8 hours on my computer. I called companies and banks and credit bureaus. And with each call, I found another problem. There was a credit card in my name that I'd never opened. There was a car loan for a vehicle I'd never purchased. There was a line of credit for a home equity loan. The total damage was approximately $67,000. I sat on my bed, the bed I'd shared with him, and I calculated that number over and over again, as if the repetition would make it seem less real. It didn't. Susan advised me to file for legal separation immediately. I did. The papers were served to David at the hotel on a Tuesday. He showed up at the house Thursday evening, demanding to know what was happening. I didn't let him in. I spoke to him through the front door. You committed fraud, I said. Identity fraud, credit fraud. I have documentation. I have police reports. Susan is filing everything with the court next week. You can't do this, he said. He was crying. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I'll pay you back. I'll do whatever you need me to do. You should have thought about that before you committed crimes, I said. He left. He called me 17 times that night. I didn't answer. The next morning, I got a call from my mother. You're being too harsh, she said, before I could even say hello. Hello to you too, Mom. David came to see me. He's devastated. He said you're divorcing him over money. Over money, Mom. He committed fraud. He stole from me, using information you gave him. I didn't know what he was going to do with that information, she said. Then you should have asked. You should have protected me. He's family now. You're supposed to work things out. You're supposed to forgive. I hung up on her. I didn't call her back for 2 months. My father called me once to ask if I was okay, and when I said yes, he didn't push it. He just told me he loved me. That was something, at least. Rebecca called every day for the first week. I ignored it. Then I finally called her back. I was right, she said, no preamble. No, I'm sorry you're going through this. What? I was right about David. I tried to tell you. You didn't tell me everything, I said. You gave me pieces. You wanted me to figure it out myself. Well, here's what I figured out. My sister knew something was wrong and she let me walk into it anyway. That's not fair, she said. Maybe not, but it's true. I hung up and blocked her number. It felt good, which made me feel guilty, which made me angry at the guilt. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. The divorce process was slow and ugly, and not in the dramatic way, not in the screaming or the thrown plates way. It was ugly in the quiet way. The way that happens in depositions and court documents and email exchanges that go back and forth, each one more poisoned than the last. David's lawyer was a woman named Catherine Hernandez, and she was very smart. She filed a countersuit claiming that I was the one who'd committed fraud, that I'd hidden assets during our marriage. She claimed he was the victim of my manipulation. She claimed I was being vindictive and greedy. None of it was true. All of it was documented as untrue. But that didn't matter because David's narrative was convincing. He'd learned how to lie so well that even professionals had to stop and consider if maybe, just maybe, he had a point. The worst part was that my mother and sister testified for him. My mother said in her deposition that I had always been cold and difficult to relate to. She said David had told her I was controlling about money. She said she thought I'd stolen his identity to frame him because I wanted to punish him for not being man enough to take over the finances. I can still see that statement in the transcript. Not man enough to take over the finances, like it was 1950. My sister said that I'd always been jealous of David's attention to her, that I'd tried to isolate him from the family, that I was the one in control of the relationship, that I was the manipulative one, and that David was too weak to push back against me. Rebecca was a therapist. She was a therapist, and she used her credentials to make her testimony sound professional, clinical. She spoke about my controlling behaviors and my emotional abuse as if she'd read them from a textbook instead of invented them in a hotel conference room with my husband's lawyer. When I watched the video deposition, I felt something I'd never felt before. It was worse than betrayal. Betrayal suggests someone took something from you, but this was different. This was someone rewriting the story of who I was. I started keeping detailed records after that. Not just of the legal case, of everything. I created a timeline of events. I printed every email, every text message, every bank statement. I organized them by date. I color-coded them. I made notes in the margins. I was obsessive about it. Susan, my lawyer, told me to let it go. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said. But I couldn't let it go. Because the truth was still the truth, and if I didn't document it, if I didn't preserve it, then the version of the story that David and my mother and my sister were telling would become the real version. I couldn't let that happen. I started something new around month 3 of the legal process. I set up a secure email account that David didn't know about. I sent copies of all my documentation to it. I bought an external hard drive and encrypted it and hid it in the back of my closet, behind the winter coats. I was building a case, not for the court, for myself. I was building proof that I wasn't crazy, that the things I remembered happened the way I remembered them, that I wasn't the villain in this story, no matter how many times they said I was. Month 4, I hired a private investigator. His name was Marcus Webb. He was a retired detective who worked out of a small office in southeast Portland. He wasn't glamorous. He had coffee stains on his shirt, and he seemed tired most of the time. But he asked good questions, and he didn't look at me like I was a scorned woman exacting revenge. "I need to know everything," I told him. "About David, about what he was doing before I married him, about the money that went missing, about my sister and mother and whatever arrangement they might have made with him. "That's going to be expensive," Marcus said. "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. He worked for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of surveillance and interviews and accessing public records and calling people I'd never met. At the end of it, he came to my office with a folder. "Your husband," he said, "is a professional con artist." He wasn't exaggerating. The folder contained documentation of a pattern that stretched back 15 years. David had done this before, multiple times. He'd marry a woman with assets, property, savings, family money. He'd slowly gain access to her finances. He'd steal what he could. Then he'd move on to the next mark. There were 3 women I knew about before me. One was currently living in Seattle and hadn't pressed charges. One had settled out of court in California. One was a woman named Patricia Feldman who'd pursued a criminal case against him in 2018. Patricia had won. She had a restraining order and a judgment for $145,000 that David had never paid. "Why is he not in jail?" I asked. "Because," Marcus said, "he's very good at disappearing before charges are filed. And because women like Patricia settle for the money judgment instead of pushing for criminal prosecution. It's faster. It's easier." I read Patricia's case file over and over. She documented everything the way I was documenting everything. And in the end, she'd won legally but lost in every other way. She'd spent 2 years in court. She'd never gotten her money back. And David had simply moved to the next city, the next state, the next victim. "I want to talk to Patricia," I said. Marcus gave me her number. Patricia Feldman was 47 years old, and she worked as a veterinarian in Seattle. We talked for 2 hours on the phone, and she told me her story in a voice that was calm and measured and sad. She'd been married to David for 11 months. During that time, he'd stolen $210,000 from her personal accounts and investment portfolio. She'd only discovered it when a bank called about a bounced check for a wire transfer she didn't authorize. "I thought I was going crazy," Patricia said. "That's what he kept telling me, that I was confused, that I was misremembering, that I was being paranoid. And I believed him. I actually believed him." "How did you get away?" I asked. "I didn't," she said. "He left. He usually does once the money runs out. But I made sure he'd never be able to do it again, at least not to me. I documented everything. The lawyers said I didn't have a strong criminal case, so I pursued civil remedies. I filed a judgment. I made sure his name was flagged in the financial system. It didn't get me my money back, but it limited his ability to do it to other people. Or at least, that's what I told myself." "Has he tried to contact you since?" I asked. "Not directly, but I've heard from mutual friends that he's married again. That's how I knew it would happen. He needs a wife. It's part of the process for him." We exchanged information. Patricia told me she was willing to testify if I needed her to. She said it wouldn't help legally, but it might help psychologically. She said talking to other victims sometimes made it feel less like a personal failure and more like a pattern. "It's not your fault," Patricia said. "You understand that, right? This isn't something you did. This is something he does. You just happen to be the one he targeted." I thanked her and I meant it, but I also knew something that Patricia didn't. I wasn't going to settle for a judgment that would never get paid. I wasn't going to accept his departure as a victory. I was going to do something else entirely. Month 5, I stopped being sad. It wasn't a dramatic transformation. It didn't happen all at once. But somewhere between the discovery that David had conned 3 women before me and the realization that my mother had known more than she'd admitted, something shifted. The grief turned into something harder. Clarity. I started seeing things differently. The depositions, the testimony, the emails from Catherine Hernandez with her carefully worded accusations, they were all part of a performance, a narrative. And narratives could be rewritten if you had the right evidence. I fired Susan as my lawyer. She was shocked. "You're making a mistake," she said. "The case is going well. We're in a good position. The judge is sympathetic to your situation." "I'm not looking for sympathy," I said. "I'm looking for justice, and I think you're being too gentle about it." I hired a new lawyer. His name was Richard Brennan, and he had a reputation for being aggressive. Some people called him ruthless. The first thing he did was look at all of Susan's work and say, "She let him get away with murder." "That's not true," I said, but I was paying him now, so I was prepared to believe it. Richard's strategy was different. Instead of trying to prove what David had done, he wanted to focus on what my mother and sister had done. If he could prove that they'd helped David commit fraud, it became a conspiracy. It became criminal. It became something that would have consequences. "But they won't testify," I said. "They've already given their depositions. They're going to stick to the story David's lawyer gave them." "Let me worry about that," Richard said. He subpoenaed my mother's financial records and my sister's email accounts, and what he found was interesting. My mother had received a $3,000 payment from David 6 months after everything had come apart. She deposited it into her personal account and told the IRS it was a loan repayment. But the timing was wrong. The payment didn't correspond to any loan she'd made to David. It corresponded to something else entirely. It corresponded to when David's lawyer was paying for her psychiatric deposition. My sister's emails were more damning. She'd been corresponding with Catherine Hernandez, David's lawyer, giving her information about me. Details about my childhood, my relationships, my financial history. Things she'd only know because she was my sister. Things that had been used to build a portrait of me as a controlling, manipulative woman. "This is conspiracy," Richard said. He said it quietly, but with a lot of satisfaction. "They've been helping him build a case against you, and they've been paid to do it." "Why would my mother do this?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Because she believed him," Richard said. "Or because she was paid to believe him. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference." He filed new documents. He moved to have the depositions thrown out based on conspiracy and fraud. He requested the judge investigate whether my mother and sister had been compensated for their testimony. The judge was not happy. Not with David, not with Catherine Hernandez, and definitely not with my mother and sister. There was a hearing, a real one this time, in front of a judge with all parties present. I sat in the courtroom and watched my mother sit on the stand and watched her realize that the payment Richard was asking her about was documented, that she couldn't explain it away, that she was caught. She cried. She said she'd needed the money. She said David had told her it was okay, that I wouldn't mind. She said she didn't understand what he was doing at the time. The judge didn't believe her. My sister didn't show up for her hearing. She claimed she was sick. She provided a doctor's note. Richard moved to hold her in contempt of court. For the first time, I felt like I was winning. But I wasn't done yet, not close to done. Month 6, I found the evidence I needed. It came from an unexpected place. Marcus, my private investigator, had been keeping tabs on David. He knew where he was working, at a car rental company under an assumed name, which was itself highly illegal. He knew where he was living, in an apartment with a woman named Amy Chen, who worked at a bank. "He's dating someone," Marcus told me, "and he's using the same playbook. She's already let him access her financial accounts. We're looking at the early stages of another con." This was when I should have felt satisfied, or righteous, or correct in my assessment that David was an incurable predator. Instead, I felt something else. I felt sorry for Amy Chen. I felt like I needed to warn her. I felt like if I didn't do something, I'd be responsible for what happened to her the same way I'd felt responsible for what happened to Patricia Feldman and the 2 other women. So I drove to her apartment. I didn't plan it. I just did it. I parked outside and I waited until I saw her coming home from work. She was tall, with black hair and a kind face. She looked like the kind of person who would believe the best in people. I approached her in the parking lot. "Amy Chen," I said. She looked at me with the wariness of a woman who'd just been approached by a stranger in a parking lot. Good instinct. "I'm Elizabeth Crawford," I said. "I know David Cross. I was married to him, and I think you should know who you're involved with before it's too late." We talked for 40 minutes in the parking lot. I showed her the documentation. I told her the story. I showed her Patricia's case. I gave her Marcus's contact information. She didn't believe me at first, but something in my voice, or in the evidence, or just in the pattern of what I was describing made her doubt, made her think twice. 2 weeks later, she contacted me. She'd confronted David. He denied everything and then disappeared. She'd found additional evidence of his fraud in the apartment, documents related to his con, names of other victims, contact information. And she'd called the police. That's when everything changed. The criminal investigation took 4 months. The detective who worked the case, her name was Sarah Okonkwo, was thorough and skeptical and very focused. She interviewed David, who lawyered up immediately. She interviewed my mother, who suddenly decided to tell the truth. She interviewed Catherine Hernandez about her payments to my mother and sister, which turned into its own investigation about legal ethics violations. The case against David was strong. Identity fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. But the case against my mother and sister for their role in the conspiracy, for being paid to commit perjury, essentially, was more interesting. My mother took a plea deal. She admitted to accepting payment from David in exchange for providing false testimony. She agreed to recant her deposition. She was sentenced to community service and probation. My sister fought it. She went to trial. Her therapist credentials were called into question. Her professional license was suspended pending investigation. Her marriage fell apart. Her husband left her, apparently decided he couldn't stay with someone who'd perjured herself in court. The trial was 2 weeks long. I attended every day. I sat in the courtroom and I watched my sister realize what she'd done. I watched her lawyer's face as he tried to explain the emails away. I watched the judge listen to testimony from me, from Patricia, from Amy Chen, from Marcus. And then I watched her be convicted of conspiracy to commit fraud, perjury, and accepting a bribe. She was sentenced to 18 months in prison. The day she was convicted, she looked at me from the stand one last time. I couldn't tell if it was a plea for forgiveness or an expression of hate. Maybe it was both. I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected to feel. I felt something emptier than that. I felt the weight of the thing I'd set in motion. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in March. Richard said I'd won. The judge had awarded me a judgment for the full amount of the fraud, $67,000. It was probably a judgment that would never get paid like Patricia's, but it was a judgment nonetheless. It was documented. It was official. It was part of the record now. David pleaded guilty to the fraud charges and was sentenced to 3 years in prison. His sentence started in June. I thought I'd feel relief when it was over. Instead, I felt hollow. I drove to my house, my beautiful pale blue house with the dark gray shutters, and I sat in the driveway for a long time. I didn't go inside. I just sat there and I thought about the last 3 years. I thought about the woman I'd been before David. She seemed like a different person. Someone naive. Someone who believed in people's goodness. Someone who hadn't yet learned that the people closest to you can destroy you without ever raising their voice. That person was gone. She'd been killed slowly, over months, in ways that left no visible wounds. I went inside eventually. I sat on the couch in my living room, the room where he'd denied stealing from me, where he'd cried and apologized and lied, and I cried for her, for the version of me I'd lost. And then I stopped crying. And then I called Marcus and told him I wanted to hire him again. I wanted to check on Amy Chen. I wanted to make sure she was okay. I wanted to find out if there were other victims I didn't know about. I wanted to know if there was anything else I should have seen coming. Why? Marcus asked. It's over. Because, I said, someone needs to keep track. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to make sure that if he does this again, the next woman has a record to look at. That's not your responsibility, Marcus said. But it was. I'd decided it was. The moment David's narrative had threatened to become the real story, I'd taken on the responsibility of making sure my version of the truth survived. Marcus sighed. I'll do it, he said. But you need to let this go eventually, Liz. You need to move on. I told him he was probably right, but I didn't believe it, and I haven't, not entirely, even now. A year after the divorce was finalized, I got a letter from the court. It was a notice that David had filed an appeal. His legal team, a new legal team, because Catherine Hernandez had been disbarred, was claiming judicial bias. They were claiming I'd manipulated the investigation. They were claiming the police had been prejudiced against David because of my narrative. His appeal had a 4% chance of success, according to Richard. I read that number, and something very quiet happened inside me. Something so quiet that no one could have heard it unless they were paying very close attention. I'd won. According to every legal measure, I'd won completely. David was in prison. My mother was in community service. My sister was serving 18 months. The judgment was in my favor. The case was closed. And yet it didn't feel like I'd won. It felt like I was tied to this story permanently. Like David's crime was the thing I'd always be defined by. Like my life would always be split into before and after. I wanted something different. I wanted to move on the way Marcus had suggested. I wanted to heal. But I didn't know how. So instead, I did what I'd been doing for the past year and a half. I organized the evidence. I documented the appeal. I prepared to fight it if it moved forward. I made backup copies of the backup copies. I visited Patricia Feldman in Seattle and we became friends, which surprised us both. I checked in on Amy Chen and helped her navigate the victim compensation process. I turned my living room into a second office. I covered the walls with timelines and photographs and documents, the way people do when they're obsessed with something. I became the kind of woman who knew every detail of her own tragedy. That wasn't the life I wanted, but it was the one I was living. And 6 months ago, I received a phone call that changed everything. It was from Sarah Okonkwo, the detective who'd investigated David's case. "We found something," she said. In an interview with one of his cellmates, David's been having visitors, women visitors, and he's been trying to orchestrate something from inside the prison. "What kind of something?" I asked. "He's trying to contact Amy Chen through a third party. He's telling people he was framed. He's telling them you fabricated evidence. He's telling them he's going to come after you when he gets out." I felt something cold move through me. All of the ice I'd built, all of the control I'd maintained, it was ice. It could melt. It could break. "What can I do?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "I'm calling to warn you. We've increased his security classification so he's being monitored more closely. But when he gets out in 13 months, he could be a threat to you. I wanted you to know." I thanked her, and I hung up. And then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice was small, smaller than I'd ever heard it before. "Elizabeth." "Hi, Mom," I said. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Everything David did he tell you he was going to do it? Did you help him on purpose?" There was a long pause. "No," she said, "but I should have asked more questions. I should have protected you instead of believing him. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I'm so sorry." I believed her, not because I wanted to believe her, but because I could hear the truth in her voice. The real truth, not the narrative truth. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said, "but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to have coffee with you next week if you want." "I would like that," she said, and she was crying now. "I would like that very much." I hung up and I sat very still. And I realized something that I should have known all along, but had spent the last 3 years learning. The story doesn't have to be about what he did to me. It doesn't have to be about his crime or my victimhood or the narrative he tried to create. The story could be about something else. It could be about the woman who learned to see clearly. The woman who documented the truth. The woman who took her broken family and tried to build it back together, even though it would never look the same. The story could be about survival that looks like stillness, revenge that looks like honesty, justice that looks like continuing to live, despite everything, with intention and care. I stood up. I started taking the documents off the wall, not throwing them away, I'm not naive about that, but putting them in a box in a closet where they could exist without consuming me. It took 3 hours. When I was done, my living room looked normal again. like a room where a person actually lived instead of like a crime scene. I ordered takeout. I opened a bottle of wine. I put on music that had nothing to do with any of this. And I sat on my couch in my beautiful pale blue house, and I practiced the very difficult art of letting go. Not of the truth, not of what happened, but of the idea that I had to carry it with me every single moment of every single day. In 2 weeks, I have a final hearing on David's appeal. The lawyers say there's nothing for me to worry about. The appeal will be denied. The case will be closed. I can move forward. I don't know if I believe them, but I know something they don't. I know that whether they're right or wrong, whether David ever gets out or stays in prison forever, I've already won the only thing that matters. I've survived, and more than that, I've learned to see clearly. I've documented the truth, and I've chosen to build my life around what's real instead of around what was done to me. That's the ending I didn't expect. It's quiet, it's small, it doesn't look like victory, but it's mine, and it's enough.